This information should be commonplace at this point, and not only should it be commonplace, people should be taking action on it and redistributing it and, making this information commonplace knowledge all over the world by putting it out publicly. And most people just aren't do that. They're stuck in a place of inaction. It's all about what you do. It's all about action. This can help you to get to a place of knowing what's taking place a whole lot better. But ultimately, you could know everything and be completely ineffective in helping to change it. Because if you're not willing to take action, all the knowledge that you take in is meaningless. Okay? You have to join the battle. You have to join the spiritual war and take action. An understanding of moral relativism is one of the most important dynamics to understand when it comes to understanding of natural law. So the first question is, what is natural law? And I'm not talking about the natural law that some philosophers talk about being, or some people in politics talk about being related to common law. It's way, way beyond that. This is forces that exist inherently in nature, in the universe, that mankind has no control over whatsoever, except to understand and to exist within the boundary conditions of. Just like gravity, just like electromagnetism, just like laws that dictate human health, just like any other physical law in creation. This is spiritual law. This is universal karmic law. It brings to us the consequences of the behaviors that we put out into the universe, like a reflective mirror. And this is the deepest occult understanding that people who have held occult knowledge tight to themselves so that they can manipulate the rest of the masses of people, have not wanted people like you to understand from day one. They say this is for us to know and not for them to know. So we can manipulate them, like I said, like taking candy from a baby. And that's exactly what they're doing. It's not even a contest. They can manipulate the situation at will because the population is ignorant of natural law. Natural law is a set of universal, inherent, objective, non-man-made, eternal, and immutable conditions which govern the consequences of the behaviors of beings with the capacity for understanding the difference between harmful and non-harmful behavior. That means it applies to human beings and those of higher level consciousness than human beings. It does not apply to species that are of lower cognitive ability to understand the difference between right and wrong than human beings. Natural law is consequential law, governing dynamics of behavior that apply to human beings and higher levels of consciousness. Meaning, if you can definitively understand what the difference between right and wrong is, it doesn't mean if you do. It means if you have the capacity to understand what the difference between right and wrong is, natural law applies to you. And that means it applies to all human beings, objectively and inherently in the universe, in nature. This is a scientific law and a scientific understanding. There are laws that apply to human behavior that this community doesn't want to acknowledge, and I'm going to explain why they don't want to acknowledge it. The understanding of natural law is centered upon two things. First, it is centered upon the knowledge of objective morality, which means if you don't have the knowledge of objective morality, you can't really definitively understand how natural law works. And two, it is hinged upon or centered upon the alignment of our behavior as human beings to that knowledge of objective morality, which again, that's predicated upon the first principle of understanding the objective morality first. Understanding real, objective, moral principles. So this means that we must know, not think we know, not believe. This has nothing to do with belief. This is not a religion, as I'm going to explain, okay? This has absolutely nothing to do with belief systems. Natural law is actually about the destruction of all belief systems. It is about definitive knowing of an occulted law inside the universe, in nature, that is not able to be just perceived with the eye or traditional scientific instrumentation, but it is knowable by its measurable and observable and repeated effects when it comes to what we receive as a consequence as a whole in society. And all you need to do to ask yourself whether we understand natural law is, what are we receiving as a result? Are we receiving freedom right now, or are we receiving abject enslavement? And then you'll know how many people really understand natural law. That's the factor that's driving the whole dynamic, folks. And many of you guys still don't understand it. And let me tell you something. It's really pathetic, and you should understand it by now. You haven't dug deeply enough. You're still skirting the surface. You're still scratching the periphery, and you haven't dug into the heart of the matter. And no one else will really tell you that. I don't really care whether you... It's your karma whether you accept this, folks. It's not mine. I'm okay. This is your karma. This is what you're going to have to answer to in creation, in nature, in the universe. You're going to have to answer to it. I'm fine with it. Many of you will stay in a delusional state. Many of you will stay in a spiritually deadened state. And you'll still poo-poo this, and you'll say it doesn't exist. And it's your funeral, it's your enslavement. But just remember, you will be held accountable karmically to the enslavement you subject others to because of your ignorance as well. Don't think it won't happen. You could, like every other totalitarian regime and everybody that brought it on, you could poo-poo that, and you could mock it, and you could say whatever you want about it. But guess what? When the day comes you leave this body, you'll find out. You will find out whether you believe that you will or not. And then it won't be a joke. It's a joke to you right now, just like it was a joke to people in the Soviet Union and a joke to people in Red China. It's just as much of a joke to you. And you can laugh about that statement too, and that's okay. So this is a wake-up call, folks, in the anarchist community. You haven't identified the governing dynamics yet. And you need to. And you need to make it the primary thing that you talk about and teach, instead of worrying about cryptocurrencies and intentional communities first. You're putting the cart before the horse. This is the horse that has to lead people into an understanding of real freedom. Anything you build before this foundation is laid will not stand. Get as offended about it as you like. That is objective, eternal, absolute, immutable truth. So we have to definitively know which behaviors are right and which are wrong. That means knowing which behaviors are right because they do not initiate harm to other sentient beings, and which behaviors are wrong because they do initiate harm to other sentient beings. That is the bottom line foundation. And while people in this community claim to know that, they don't understand the wider framework, and they don't understand why moral relativism is so behavior back to us and delivers us the result, the consequence of what we choose to enact through our behaviors. And that's how you can understand how this dynamic scientifically works. All you got to do is look at the result, and then you understand the cause. These are the laws of cause and effect. People have called it the golden rule. People have called it the laws of karma. They've called it consequentialism and many other names. I talk about it from the perspective that it really is. It's the laws that are embedded in the fabric of nature. These are universal, moral laws that govern behavioral consequence of human beings and higher order intelligences than human beings. So here's how natural law works. When human beings in the aggregate, meaning in the collective as a whole, as a species, not just individually, when human beings in the aggregate live in harmony with natural law and are therefore moral, they become and remain free. When human beings in the aggregate live in opposition to natural law and are therefore immoral, they become and remain enslaved. And this happens over long swaths of time. This does not happen instantaneously, obviously. This is why understanding a long view of history is so important. And it's so important not to repeat the mistakes of human history. This is an extremely serious situation that we're in, and this is the choice point. This is it.
Help by spreading this message. Share with your friends, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Turn on notifications to stay updated.